Good evening, and I hope you all are well. On behalf of Alpha Phi Alpha's General President, Brother Dr. Willis Lanza III, I am Brother Dr. Jeffrey Sterling, the Surgeon General for Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Allow me to introduce tonight's moderator, Alpha's Deputy Surgeon General for Mental Health, Brother Dr. Ron Kennedy Bailey. As you should know by now, if you've been following us, Brother Dr. Bailey is the Kathleen and John Bricker Chair, Professor and Head of the Department of Psychiatry at LSU Health Sciences Center. He is also the Chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Cobb Research Institute and the past President of the National Medical Association. We're definitely proud to have him as our Deputy Surgeon General for Mental Health. And Brother Kennedy, before you get started, with respect to tonight's event, I am very pleased that we're discussing trends in mental health for this upcoming year. And I'm also very fascinated to have you and our guest kind of put a spin on it so that we can tie this in with the empowerment theme that we continue to have with these webinars. So as we have titled this, mental health is the first step of preventive health. And I hope that as much as our audience finds this presentation interesting, they will also find it informative. So with no further ado, let me turn it over to you, and I will see you at the end of the show. Have a great show.
As well, thank you very, very much, Brother Sterling. Brother Sterling's done an outstanding job, in my opinion, as our initial and founding Surgeon General initiative for Alpha Alpha. I also am thankful to our General President, Willis Lanza, for I think having a foresight to support this issue of a premium on health and healthcare of brothers, by brothers, and about brothers. Although we're very comfortable with the information we share, should extend throughout the entirety, I think, of our society, certainly the African American community, for young men of all shapes and sizes, as well as others as well. I'm very appreciative and thankful to an opportunity to note that I have been in New Orleans now for a year and a half, making good friends, good professional colleagues. And at the top of the list is the young brother we have on tonight, Brother Brian Turner. Brother Turner is listed as the chief chair of psychology at at Xavier University here in New Orleans. Met his brother with Sigma Lambda, our grad chapter here in New Orleans. I'm very happy to note that the two of us hope to go into some work together on what's called sanity commissions, which is a major aspect of how mental health assessments and evaluations are performed before they go to a judge or the court. New Orleans, unfortunately, many would argue, like many cities, many settings, may not have culturally competent or African American males in psychology or psychiatry engaged in this type of work in many cities around the country, including here in New Orleans. So his formal comments are that Dr. Brian Turner, born and raised in New Orleans as a native, put his undergrad studies at Southern University of Baton Rouge, put his doctoral studies in clinical psychology at Jackson State University. Brother Turner is the owner and operator of Moments of Truth, LLC, a private practice as a licensed clinical psychologist. He serves as associate professor and department head in the Department of Psychology at Xavier, as I mentioned. Clinically, Dr. Turner has worked with a diversity of issues and clients in many settings. Most ardently, he's worked with Black males from adolescence to adulthood on a wide spectrum of issues. He has published work in peer-reviewed journals, book chapters, and technical reports on community health, masculinity, identity development, and mentorship. Brother Dr. Turner is a proficient on topics ranging from reduction of mental health stigma, masculinity, identity, therapy and culture, and mental health in higher education. Dr. Turner's work as a professor and clinician and researcher is grounded in his multicultural training, which examines the impact of culture on mental health. During his time at Xavier University, his research is focused on the Black male experiences in higher education, Black women and risky behaviors, and mental health at our traditional HBCUs. And most importantly, Dr. Turner is a proud father of the intelligent and beautiful Blair Layla. I've met her myself, but she is intelligent and beautiful. Also daddy to Von Duke Bailey Turner, full-blooded German Rottweiler, as noted. Brother Turner, welcome, and happy to have you on the Alpha Phi Alpha Surgeon General's Initiative.
Good evening, Brother Bailey. And I would like to thank our General President, Brother Lyons, and his leadership, as well as our Brother Dr. Sterling and his leadership as Surgeon General in this very important initiative to begin to take a very serious look at our global health as Black men within the fraternity, but also the work that we do in service to others. So this will be a great show tonight. Thank you for inviting me. So let's get it going.
But you're right. I think if we're going to look at three themes for tonight, our topic and our title is mental health is a first step toward preventative health. So we talk a bit about prevention. I think secondly, we're going to speak a fair amount about what you do, because I think it's imperative and essential for us as African American males in the fields of mental health, psychology, and psychiatry to bring an element of truth and accuracy and validity to the entire community of what we do. I think very often we are a misunderstood group of professionals, even within our own community. Again, I thank our fraternity for giving us this medium to discuss exactly what it is that a psychologist does, and why I think an African American psychologist with a culturally competent framework can bring remarkable value to individuals, I think, throughout our community. And third, I like to always address issues regarding what are our recommendations? What should we do? I think your life, probably like mine, has been filled with persons contacting you one way or the other, family or friends or neighbors or coworkers, and basically asking, what should I do to address or solve this particular problem? Many of the key problems that adversely affect young African American males. So those are the three themes tonight: prevention, who are we and what do we do, and what are some of our recommendations, I think, for our audience. And throughout, we'll probably get some questions in the chat.
Yeah.
I'll be able to bring your way. Let's start off with this issue regarding prevention. Your thoughts, considerations, and what works are you involved in now that are preventative on the field of mental health?
Well, I think what we look at when we speak preventative care, it really is grounded in our practices within our community, within our homes. And an issue, especially here in New Orleans, is how we deal with issues within our school systems, our educational systems. So what I really like to think about in terms of preventative is we have to create an environment within our homes that really serves to do what Brother Frederick Douglass said, which is we don't have to heal broken men if we raise our kids, right? And I'm paraphrasing because I want us to think about it a little differently. We have broken men because as children, we allow what we call and what we know as ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, to permeate our society, permeate our communities, right? Right now in New Orleans, we have a travesty of criminal activity, which actually is only being done by a small cadre of individuals, but it's creating a situation within our city that makes us look at young Black men as if they are terrorists, as if they are animals. And we have to change that narrative. So what do we do preventatively, right? We need to ensure that families are creating the spaces with which to raise healthy men. We have to do that. And something you brought up, which around identity, right? And then a lot of clients I'm seeing right now, identity seems to be a very central theme in a very easy way. And you said this, Brother Bailey, which was, who are we? So even as we ask ourselves as professionals, who are we? That's the same question oftentimes being asked within our young Black male youth. And even when we think about our young Black women youth, right? Who are we? We've been so disconnected from the true validity of who we are as people that we now serve in a way that we don't really have that same continuity of identity. So preventative in terms of what we should do, we should be ensuring that and if we play with what's going on in our country right now, we see this onslaught of attacks against critical race theory and culturally competent teaching. I implore us as Black people specifically to make sure that we're teaching our kids about the rich, positive history of who we are as Black people.
Yeah,
J.A. Rogers, I'm sorry, go ahead, bro.
I'll jump in and add to that by saying I think that the field of opportunity is rich. People very often are running to get the front of the line to be the ones to give advice and say what others should be doing and what should we be doing for young Black males. My problem has historically been that all too often the advice, although well-intentioned or not, is overly punitive. It's excessively legalistic in its approach. You know, we want to out-militarize and have bigger guns and have more police in schools, and we want to arrest somebody quicker. I was here in New Orleans years ago when they were taking a vote in the legislature to decrease the age at which you could charge somebody as an adult. You know, rather than age 17, they're going to drop it to age 14. It was called Amendment A, and therefore at age 14 or 15, we could give you harsher punishment. So I think that our entire society should be aware that many have been engaged in this activity. I don't think it's been productive. In fact, I think it's been counterproductive. I don't think it's helped the Black male community or the overall group of society. So part of our struggle has to be heard. I think often our voices are muted, unfortunately, necessarily. And we have to make the argument that Black young men are people too, and a humanistic approach has great value. That's why early intervention, prevention, as you and I discussed a few days ago at a backyard barbecue, I learned a lot of that backyard barbecue can go a long way toward addressing many of these themes that put adverse messages first. We should move toward more humanistic, clinically based models of care for young Black men.
Exactly. And so when we think about it, right now in New Orleans, I'm a mentor with the Silverback Society. We're a part of the New Orleans Mentorship Collaborative, which brings together 4 groups, 4 organizations that mentor young Black boys. We have Son of a Saint, Reaching for the Stars, 100 Black Men, and Silverbacks, right? We go into, specifically the Silverbacks, we go into the school system for 8th grade boys and provide a curriculum that gives them a vision and a trajectory for manhood, masculinity, and the roles that can play within their communities, right? And so when we think preventative, it's not going to be care that requires us to hospitalize. It's not going to require us to criminalize. It's not going to require us to incarcerate our young Black men. If anything, that's the point about why I say first and foremost within the home. And Brother Bailey, I know you know this, the first teachers are within our homes. And so I want to work to ensure that every parent, every father, every mother has the tools within their home to begin to empower young Black boys with a positive self-image. Because my mentor, Dr. Joseph White, and he spoke to me in 1995 when I read his article, Towards the Black Psychology. He spoke to me through that article, and then I had the ability to meet him years later, and he mentored me. But he spoke to me about the Black experience, specifically for Black males. Black men specifically struggle because if we don't see it, then we struggle with how do we be it. But he said something to me. He said, but if you see it, then you can achieve it, right? So preventatively, we got to make sure that our schools are providing positive images of Black men to young Black boys so that they can understand. And why is that important? Because in today's society, too often, it is the toxic masculine image that's being presented to young Black boys that's playing out for them that they buy into. And as we said the other day, Brother Bailey, we was joking, but I still think about this. When I was in my younger, and you said young brother too, I laughed at that when you said that, right? But in my younger days, I remember when Destiny's Child put out the song, I Need a Soldier.
Right.
And I remember thinking, they had a line in that song that said, I want a brother that flips his money 3 ways. I'm from New Orleans. I grew up in the night war, across the city many days going to school. Everywhere I went, if a brother was flipping his money 3 ways, that meant he was selling drugs. Well, I don't sell drugs. I have a 401k, I have an IRA, I have a PhD, I have a mortgage, I have decent credit, I have a home, I have a daughter. They never said any of that in their song. So inherently, what that begins to play out in terms of what we are fighting against is these images and messages that are played out in music, that are played out in movies and across social media that tell young Black boys that being a Dr. Bailey or a Dr. Sterling or a Dr. Turner isn't necessarily a cool thing. And it tells young women inherently that if you want a man of substance, then this is the type of man you should be pursuing or allowing to pursue you. And that's when we have to think about, as you said, the question is preventative. We have to ensure that we're putting realistic, positive, and accessible Black men in front of our youth so that they can actually make contact, that they can engage, and ultimately aspire to be like those Black men.
A timely transition, well said by definition. And I think I'll point out that I think the second theme of tonight's discussion, and if we get to it, the fourth will deal with the issue of violence. Hard to have these discussions and what happened in Louisville the other day, not talk about violence at all. But the second thing really is, who are we? And I think you really walk right into it. The reality is mentorship matters. Your work with Some of the Saint, I think, is timely. Many of us have various touch points with young men, whether it's Alpha Phi Alpha's Project Impact. I've been very involved with that, and I've appreciated throughout my career. Many with our church, our community organizations, very often with sports. My father was a coach growing up. Coaching creates that opportunity. And one thing that I like to comment on whenever I get a meet opportunity like this, and I love to hear your feedback on it, is how my experience, I think, is so different than many, probably 99% of the human beings alive in the world when it comes to young Black men. Mainly because young Black men very often come to me like many other persons. At one part or the other, there's some problem, there's some conflict, whether it's at school or at home, whatever the case may be, whether it's socially and we're at the mall or we're at a baseball game, or whether they come to me professionally and they have to sit out of office and make an appointment. And very often a young black man will walk in at these very vulnerable ages, 12 and 13 and 14, let alone 17 and 18 and 19. And there's an external veneer that's rough and tough and with a hard core, and I'm big and bad and you can't talk to me and yada, yada, yada. And I've learned to give that issue time, give that human being a chance to let the external veneer and the fray dissipate. And at some point, you have a human being in front of you who feels very vulnerable, who looks very soft emotionally, not physically, who has a remarkable degree, I think, of vulnerability and a need to be heard and understood, just like everybody else alive in the world, other demographics and other ages, races and ethnicities. So I've often thought that one issue by being culturally competent, the term is often used in this setting, that you don't have to be a black male or a mental professional to engage in, but you have to understand and appreciate the value that I think those demographics do bring to the equation when you're trying to give a person a chance to let that guard down and finally receive the benefits that mental health care and intervention may be able to offer to you. So been a chronic theme, a running theme throughout my entire career, that setting and that initial opportunity to maybe be able to create some engagement with a young man when there's been some problems that others have not been able to communicate with bi-directionally. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about that and what has been your experience been, and maybe what some of the strategies have been that has worked for you to make those engagements that allow for better doctor-patient relationship.
Yeah. So ironically, when I was on internship, I was a part of a group that actually brought Dr. White, Joseph White, to the University of Akron. And I remember within a part of this conversation, a professional on campus was speaking about how when young black men would come into her office, they would have their pants sagging and they would have their hair twisted and they would be listening to music, and it was, undesirable music, and she would turn them away. She would rebuke them in the moment, and you can't come in here like that, and blah, 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 right? And so, at this time, I'm still listening to Lil Wayne and a bunch of other stuff I probably shouldn't have been listening to. But I stood up, I said, hey, do you realize that you might have been that person's first connection with this university? And as a black woman, he may have felt, or she may have felt comfortable coming to you in their purest, most vulnerable form. And instead of you embracing them and walking them through a better pathway of success, you've rebuked them just as though mainstream society would have. It's like, what do you think that person's appreciation or perception of you at this university would be at that point? And she was stumped, right? What do you mean? I say, well, you might have reminded that young man or woman of their mother or aunt, and they felt comfortable coming to you because they might have really needed help, and you've turned them away. So to your point, Brother Bailey, what I oftentimes say is we got to stop as black people buying into the very, very, untenable perspective that we hold of our own people. I don't get afraid when the homie, as we say in New Orleans, the little wolves or the rounds or whatever come around. I don't get upset. I don't get scared because I know one or two things. I can find out how I know them, how I can help them, or I can help change their life. And oftentimes that's what they're looking for. They're not going to try to engage people who want to care, right? So as you stated earlier, Brother Bailey, when you said that humanistic, and Sister Cotton repeated this, and it's staring at me, and I'm glad you brought this point, the humanistic, clinically based model of healthcare, right? And if we expand on that, what that really talks about is, where's the human in you? I treat my clients, I treat individuals and people as if it was my own brother or sister or mother that was looking to receive care. And as you spoke about the sanity commissions, that's one of the things that was put in my lap with that effort is how do we instinctually bring a more humanistic, client-centered, and honestly global approach to how we treat Black men and boys and women and girls at this point, right? So first and foremost, I remember that I wasn't always Dr. Turner. I wasn't always the guy who could speak well or who had the right approach. It took some time, right? But within that perspective, I think the reminder for me is very much the fact that we enlist ourselves to do this work because we see what's going on in our community. So bottom line is I always think about how would I want someone to treat my own family member? How would I want someone to come back to me and say they were treated by a colleague? Second thing, I'm reminded of the very real space that we occupy. You and I and other brothers and sisters who've traversed this path through this professional identity, we could very easily be on the other side of that table sometimes. We could very easily be in a position where we're the ones who need legal representation or we need clinical care. And so I'm just reminded that it takes a human to treat a human, that we have to be mindful that at the end of the day, we are servants of people. We're servants of that individual who needs our care because they have a family to help. They're trying to change society. They're trying to be a productive member of our community. So what do? First and foremost, that's why I'm at Xavier University. I took myself into the point of realizing that what I saw happening was that there were very, very, very good students, right? And I say very, very that much because I remember seeing students who were not getting the quality of mentorship, the quality of research experience, the quality of guidance to understand what they needed to do to become a professional at this point. So I really took it upon myself in coming to Xavier to commit to the ideal of helping undergraduate African-American students who wanted to work in the mental health care field get to that point. So at that point, I decided I wanted to move away from working in a college university counseling center and moving into an academic position where I could help students understand the pedagogical and didactic experiences of education in mental health, but also connect them to brothers like you, Brother Bailey, and other persons in and around New Orleans and around the country. But the other thing was this, and this is probably the most important thing for me in terms of why I'm reminded about this work we do, because somebody did it for me.
Yeah, I'd argue that that really, I think, is a secret sauce of good healthcare and good mental health care for all of us, whether we're male or not, African American or not, or culturally competent or not. But it does lead to, being culturally competent. And I'm reminiscent of a variety of my past work experiences and what they've taught me. And I'll share one tonight. Years ago, a group that I was with went to Liberia. I think Brother Story mentioned I was national president of the African American Doctors, the National Medical Association, 10 years ago. I was national president 113, and now we're on 123. So 10 years goes fast, if you will. But so one year we spent some time, raised some money. We got some of the money that's called PEPFAR, which came under the George Bush administration, and you get quite a bit of money. It was initially geared for fighting HIV and AIDS in the continent of Africa, and we would use some of it, I think, for mental health, if you will. There've been a civil war for like 13 years in Liberia, country flooded with guns, and just a horrible situation all the way around. But there were quite a bit of these, NGOs, these non-government organizations that many were from Europe. And I just remember being struck as I was there. We were there for about 2 weeks, about 37 doctors, and the National Medical Association went to provide care. And I just remember just thinking all too often how my experience with people many were from Europe, had just been very different than my experience as a young African-American boy. I grew up in Beaumont, Texas, where there were many nice people, but some who really were not quite as nice and who didn't see the potential good in a person if you were not, already on top of the ladder. So that's one of my things and considerations is that if you see somebody and they're making all A's and they're a captain of the football team and, they're SGA president and all that kind of business, it's easy to kind of gravitate toward them. What I've seen in society is that all too often, if you are not at the top of the food chain early on, and especially if you're African-American male, very quickly you get one chance at what society views as a failure. And society is remarkably effective at bringing a substantial amount of resources against you once you've failed, or once you've been arrested, or once you've had a conflict with the wrong person at the wrong time. And there's a myriad, I think, of very complex and conflictual rules and regulations that make it hard for you to kind of get out of. Try being on parole or probation in the U.S. and you can't get a job because you're on probation, and you can't get off probation because you can't pay your fees. You can't pay fees on a job. I mean, it's just some of it really doesn't make a lot of sense. If you're a society that really wanted persons to not have a major problem in the first place, and I turn minor emotional and psychological difficulties into major legal problems, or if we were truly rehabilitative, which is what the textbook teaches us, this whole idea of penology, if you have difficulty, is there's isolation, put people away if they are doing bad things. You can't hurt other people, take weapons away from them. There's also deterrence. We put you in jail because we want other people to see what will happen if you do a bad thing. So you'll be deterred from doing other bad things, whether you're young or old. So it can be issues of retribution, which is adverse, but it should be rehabilitation. Like many correctional settings are called rehabilitation facilities, and we've really kind of gotten away from that. And you don't have to go to corrections or jail or prison for that to occur. I'm a forensic doctor by training, so I'm very interested in that issue. But I think that all throughout the concept of emotional growth and development, there are opportunities to stub your toe and have some difficulty along the way. You're in school and you get sanctioned, or you get suspended or expelled, if you will, or you have a job and there's a problem and there's a minor charge for simple theft or things of that nature, if you will. And I think we're creating a society increasingly that's overly hostile toward people, inhumane, if you call it that way. I think that's ignored people like us who are mental health professionals who may have a voice to share about young men who may have a lot to offer if they just kind of get on the right track. That's why programs like Alpha's Project Alpha try to mentor, and ones like that you mentioned, try to mentor and get young men back on the right track. So a lot to be said for our own individual experiences. You can share some of yours as well. But I think our audience should hear that we think there's an effort to be made to salvage and not overly be punitive toward young Black males when they have any kind of a problem in American society. And that has to be, I think, one of our prevailing goals. And
yeah. Well, what's ironic is that the KKK does not have to ride down Main Street anymore, right? We all too often within our own communities will actually be and perpetuate some of these beliefs and some of the negative stereotypes, right? So undoubtedly, I think what we're actually touching the surface here on is the fact that we have a duty to ourselves, and I'm reminded of that. And I think when I actually, to your point, you reminded me of a trip I took to Ghana and the work we were doing there. We were examining the similarities to the post transatlantic slave trade that occurred in Ghana and in West Africa and in the United States, specifically New Orleans. And what we found was that the cultural derivatives were so similar, right? The same imperialistic, white, male, patriarchal, westernized society issues that were happening to us in New Orleans and America was being put upon our brothers and sisters in Ghana and West Africa. Kwame Nkrumah, president, the departed president of Ghana, the first president post-independence, was educated in the United States. And the reality is that we have to understand and we have to remind each other that our first duty, and in no way is this to demean anybody else, but our first duty is to ensure that our people are healthy, right? And I say that in a very sensitive way because if we're reminded of the fact that the African ethos, right, is not individualistic, Nike, just do it, an army of one. It is truly about the tribe, the village, the community surviving. And if we don't remind ourselves of that, that's why it's so easy for some of us, the brightest and best of us. And if you remember back in the 90s, Public Enemy and brother Khalid Muhammad said, have you forgotten that some of us, by being brought here, in the way we act, that we've lost our mind, we've lost our religion, we lost our language, and in many ways, as I said it wrong, we've lost our mind, right? But if you think about it, that's what we see. And Brother Bailey, you notice, because when we look at a lot of the clinical work, we find that once again, that struggle in a lot of people is, who am I connected to? So to the point you make, which is so lovely to me oftentimes, is the fact that I know who I'm connected to. My mother, my brothers, my daughter, my fraternity brothers, my line brothers, my partners I play football with. You play basketball, I play football. I think back a lot of times to those days and tour days and early training. And at Southern, we never lost to Grambling while I was there, right? So that was a connection for us, right? The fact that we won 3 national championships, we won, these things, we had these connections. We know who we are. You can't tell me who I am because I know. And when we think about young Black men, and once again, young Black women, because we see the crime statistics are showing that there's a rising on Black women engaging in criminal behaviors. We see some of the same inherently negative outcomes in our young Black women because they're being forced into many of the same situations and circumstances by which they have to redefine who they are. And it becomes very important. And just, Brother Bailey, I use this in my clinical practice all the time. I ask folks, who are their mirrors? And they'll be, what do you mean, Doc? What do you mean? I said, well, think about it. If you were to walk into a hall of mirrors or the funny mirror house, what do you see? And they would say, obviously, I see a mirror that shows me tall and skinny or short and, chubby or, just a funny shape. I was like, sometimes that's what happens in our lives. We begin to connect with people that give us reflections of ourselves that may not be accurate. Usually that reflection of who we are in other people is how they perceive us. And I tell clients, we have to go out and we have to find people that will give us an accurate reflection of who we truly are so that we can see the things that we like and the things that we might need to change. And so I'm okay if my mother tells me, hey, Brian, I saw that you did this and I didn't really like that, because my mom is connected to me. If one of my brothers tells me that, I can take that. But some people tell me things because they just want me to do what they want me to do, and they don't really care how I feel about myself. And so I want us to be reminded tonight that we have to we have to be the mirrors that our young people need so that they can see accurate reflections of who they are, so that they can actually aspire to and want to be healthy, that they can want to be a part of the community, that they can want to engage in their civic duty and their community duty, that they can want to go to school and do well. Because that's the other thing, right? All too often, if the only image that brothers and sisters are being provided are images that are unhealthy and obviously not going to work out, then they don't have any other options.
Well, timely point. I clearly think that this idea of mentorship comes into play. Term that I think you so correctly mentioned earlier. I do think that mentorship has to be both personal and professional. I think that one develops a relationship, and it should be bi-directional. We should listen as much as we say with a young man that we think we are mentoring, because the reality is we can learn from that young man as much as we actually share. I give Surgeon General Brother Sterling a lot of credit because he mentioned more than a few times we really would do well to bring some young college brothers on the show, and I'm committed to doing that going forward, because I think that we do need to hear the messages that they're hearing and better understand how to communicate with them. We struggle sometimes with the same problems that I think I mentioned earlier. We end up in an echo chamber around the same ones, the ones who have done well and who have a lot of success, and you kind of run to the front of the line. But I think our goal has to be, especially in mental health, to be inclusive and to be have a wide-ranging, broad-based tent. So all of our brothers in our fraternity and otherwise, young men in general, have a role to play, and we have, I think, a responsibility to help them find, I think, some degree of success. I think the other issue that I'd ask you about tonight is when you have a young man in care, and what people love to describe as therapy. I see it as bi-directional. I see it as a relationship. What are some of the cues that you look for in these one-on-one sessions that help you communicate more effectively, and that you found help you particularly be poignant and timely in moving young African-American men toward better decision-making and better overall behaviors that lead to more health-oriented functional activity?
Yeah. So there's actually two things in a very funny way. I look for hope and I look for humor, right? I believe that if a young man can still tie into that hope factor, right? That is something that if a brother or sister has hope, they ready. You know what I mean? And I'm just gonna be very blunt with this. If a person don't have hope, that means they've lost a lot. And that's a big dig for me. I'm a big guy and I like working, but if I see a person that hope, then I become a little sad, right? Because that means something has happened in that life of that individual that has probably given them a very negative perception of themselves. And I say humor because in Dr. White, we talked about this before his passing. He had the seven psychological strengths of African Americans, and one of them was galas of humor. And what he talked about was the fact that in the space that we often occupy in America, you can't make it if you can't sometimes laugh at yourself and laugh at your circumstance. And he used the example of Jesse B. Simple, right? That sometimes, yes, sir. That sometimes you got to be able to just laugh at yourself and laugh at what's going on, because sometimes it's too bad that you want to cry. So hope and humor. That's my first two things I look at with brothers to work with, is to try to make sure that they still have that semblance, that kernel of hope. That hope allows me to begin to plant the seeds and then also nurture that garden that young brother has, that he's still looking to grow, right? That hope is what we see, that glimmer in their eyes of still wanting to pursue that degree, that training, that athletic opportunity, maybe that relationship, right? So hope for me is huge, because hope is also that thing that I know for me is about lived experiences, right? And as I alluded to with humor allows us to sometimes just laugh at what's going on, right? Humor allows us to be able to say, man, that was real silly of you, but let's talk about what we need to do next time you find yourself in that situation. And I think that piece, and I'm gonna come back to what you said in regards to that humanistic, clinically based model of healthcare. If we're not treating people like humans, if we're not treating people like people, if we're not giving people the space, right, the largesse of space to just be, they're not going to open up to us. So to the other point, right, oftentimes I found that I don't like looking like Sigmund Freud when I'm doing therapy, right?
Right.
I don't like showing up in the suit and being stuffy and appearing as though I'm going to take somebody away and they won't like it. Oftentimes when I do therapy, I'm in a polo or a t-shirt, some jeans, and a pair of usually pretty fashionable tennis shoes. Why you think that work, brother? Because I now look like somebody that we just chilling at home about to play PlayStation, or uncle or big brother.
You can
It's
connect.
a whole lot, yeah, it's a whole lot easier to have that conversation, at that point. So for me, I think the reality of it is we have to bring ourselves to the level of the individuals who need our care. I'm not worried about presenting myself in such a way that someone thinks I'm more than what I am. I'm a servant leader, and I put the servant first for a reason.
Yeah, I'd say that, I early in my career would make the point, a bit tongue in cheek, but actually more truth than fiction, that for all my training as a psychiatrist and my specialty training as a forensic psychiatrist, I think I really am a specialist in young black men. And one reason is that I've seen so many. I went to residency, and people know that you go to med school and you go to residency. There was 16 in the class. I went to a large residency with 64 over 4 years, and at one point I think I really throughout I was the only one African American male of 64 people over the course of those 4 years. I think my last 2 years, there was another African American male who came in, and Dr. Freeman. But I also, because of that, get referrals of all of the young black males that came in. Because I thought that it was a good thing that my colleagues were sending people to me because they thought I could help them more. I do wonder over time, though, if it was actually a bad thing or a good thing that had some negative implications, because maybe many of my colleagues were afraid of young black males and didn't really want them in that setting as patients. Another story, I think, for a follow-up discussion. But I can say that during that time period, I very much agree with you. I found it essential to be able to connect. That's why I use that term when you mentioned how one dresses. And I think there are a lot of things we can do to connect. You've already mentioned that you play college football, and I'll say I play college basketball, although it does sound like you guys won more games than we did. I don't know if we had quite that much of a winning record when I was at Morehouse College, 82, 86. Another story for another time. But I can say that that issue of sports has always helped me.
Yeah.
I've often been able to move a conversation toward a discussion of what sports that young man likes. And I think young men of many ethnic backgrounds like sports, whether they're running and playing in football or baseball, the case may be. And I think it does allow some degree of a connection. So I think that being culturally competent, how I want to move the conversation, doesn't require that you have to be a black male or a large, tall guy like you and I, but does require you, the professional, to be adept and skilled and willing to move the conversation towards something that makes a young man comfortable. So I love your point that if someone, whether they're African American or not, chooses to be antagonistic toward a young man who comes in, because that person does something that they don't like, how you wear your clothes or how long your hair is or whatever, then I think the clinician is being disenfranchising. And that's a clinician's fault. That's an error, in my opinion. We should, I think, teach other clinicians. And I now have a lawyers department you mentioned. I'm sure you do as well. And we have the opportunity to have some impact, hopefully, on young doctors who work under us to make them mindful and aware that up under this management or leadership, you are going to treat all persons fairly and respectfully, whether they're a 55-year-old Caucasian woman or 19-year-old young black male. Be interested in your thoughts about that issue as well, because you are at Xavier, which has remarkable, notoriety for being outstanding in its educational programs, bringing in, young people and get them into med school and pharmacy school. So you have a lot of positive success there that people know about. I'd imagine there's also some challenges in some of the young men who need a little help.
Yeah. So what you just nailed down is just that, once again, what is our central approach? To me, cultural competency is central to competency. If you are not a culturally competent practicing clinician, then you are not competent. There is no two ways about it. You have got to be culturally competent. You don't know who's going to walk through the door and need your assistance on that day. An example for me, actually, and it kind of funny because it prompted me to think about, when have I found myself not culturally competent, right? Which, of course, nobody wants to highlight a moment where they weren't on top of their game. But I remember receiving a referral for a young black male in a setting where it was said, Dr. Turner, black man, you're a black man, y'all will be good together. Young brother comes to me, couple sessions are going by, and I'm just getting all of the roadblocks, right? I'm getting all of the resistance. I'm getting all of the standard, I'm not going to tell you nothing about anything ever. I'm devastated because I'm like, why do you not want to work with me? What's wrong with me, right? Then it hit me, Brian, he doesn't want to work with you. No matter how good you are, no matter how competent you are, there's something about him that he's not ready. So long story short, I referred him to a colleague, which happened to be a younger white woman. Therapy went off. Things went great. So we wound up doing the staffing situation. And I asked her, I said, so how is so-and-so doing? And she began to share with me what was going on and the breakthroughs was going on. And so then she tells me, and Brian, he said that the reason why he couldn't work with you is because you reminded him of his father. His father was a tall, black, bald man who wore suits all the time because he was a preacher. And I was like, well, what's wrong with that? She's like, well, his problem is that he's having issues around coming out as gay. And he didn't want to have the counter transference or transference possibly of you treating him like his father. And I was devastated because I thought that I was in a position where there was no way how that this young man would think I was not able to help him. But as you stated, what happens is I had to be aware that it's not about me. I had no problem finding out that this young man was getting the services he needed and was moving along and doing well because I wanted to make it about me. But that's the central tenet of cultural competency. It ain't about me. It's all, what does my client need? And I have no problem with referring someone to services that better suits them if that's what they need, right? Second example I give you, I was working with a young man who was from Saudi Arabia, identified as a member of the Wasabi Islamic sect, which was a very strict sect. And at that point in time, I had very little direct connections with anybody who was not a member of the Nation of Islam or Black Muslim at that point, right? So what happens is this young man says, look, I don't know what your experience is with my culture, but I want you to read this book. Maybe this will help you. I read the book overnight, right? And what that book did was open me up to a whole new world. What I did in the next session, because I read that book, that young man, I had taken notes, Brother Bailey. I got notes, I got papers, and I'm like, hey, what does this mean? I read this in the book, and they said this and explain this to me. He stops and says, wait, you read the whole book? I said, yes. He's like, thank you. He's like, okay, I'll be comfortable working with you. He didn't care anymore about it. Just me reading the book, showing that interest. We had a great therapeutic relationship, great experiences. We figured out a lot of stuff that he had to deal with because he's living in America. He's a person of Islamic faith. He was trying to deal with this dual identity kind of competing thing, right? So once again, coming back to the point around cultural competency, what do? It's not about us. Our service to people who need our service is for them. And so I implore my colleagues to think about this and almost to come full circle. We talked about learning at the beginning. is that it's really about ensuring that we do what our clients need. We do what those individuals who come to us. So at Xavier specifically, we try to make sure that we have regular conversations about the needs of our students, regardless of identity, broadly defined, but also specific. We put ourselves and position ourselves to be more than just professors. So we get to know our students, we get to know what they're trying to do. Oftentimes I have what I call mentor dates, right? Where if I'm mentoring someone, we have regular conversations. We go out to eat, we sit down, and we have conversations about the broad spectrum of who they are. And all of that comes back to this point that I think we're making on this evening specifically. How do we help and assist brothers and sisters get the care they need? How do they connect to the people that can assist them? But we have to be the ones to show that. And so once again, I try to make sure that I am in no way, shape, or form turning others off from the potential need they have when it comes to their mental health care.
Tremendous point. I'd share for the audience. We spend, actually, it's outstanding work, brother. I'm remarkably impressed. But I think that, the term that we share with our audience that we learn in this business is transference and countertransference. And the idea is that not just in psychiatry, but in every area of medicine. I see some of my colleagues in the chat who are physicians, probably do very good mental health work, although they may not be psychiatrists themselves, maybe in primary care or cardiology or the areas of medicine. I think that this idea that is not about us really strikes home and brings remarkable value. It's an issue that we probably have an ideal vantage point to try to share and teach and instruct other professionals in our profession about the relative value of understanding all of the innuendo going on in a therapy session. And I think if a patient's coming to see you in primary care, a part of that is a therapy session. I commented early in my career, I did a lot of moonlighting work in primary care, family, and you're trying to earn some income and the like. So although I was a psychiatrist, when I would go to these moonlighting jobs, the patients come in didn't know I was a psychiatrist. I was a resident then. I was just a doctor with a white coat on. And I became almost, hilarious how often someone would come in and you get the little chart. Back in the old days, you have the physical chart outside the door, and it would say headache or stomach pain or foot hurt or whatever. And they walk in and they spend, 2 minutes talking about the headache and 28 minutes discussing the psychosocial problems in their life and the relationship problems and the job problems and the money problems and all of the emotional issues and being misunderstood in the whole 9 yards. So transference is the term we use for the audience that addresses when a patient comes in and he looks at a Brian Turner. Brian Turner doesn't know it, but there's 1,000 things going through the patient's head. Turner looks like his father, and Turner reminds me of somebody he really liked because the basketball coach was very nice to him. Now the coach named for him, so I loved. Or Turner reminds him of somebody that beat him up when he was little, and he's unhappy with you, the case may be. The struggle very often, you're right, though, is I think countertransference is what we actually bring to the equation. So at times we don't acknowledge as professionals how the patient makes us feel. I mentioned earlier, I really do think a lot of my colleagues when I was in residency were afraid of young black males. So the countertransference is that the young black male walks in and they overreact, overrespond to the cues the person sees. Maybe they do fuss about the way his hair looks or if he, has his pants hanging out XYZ, really want him out of the office because he creates an uncomfortable feeling, I think, in them. And we got to get past that because these are some issues that healthcare in general, across the full spectrum, has allowed a mischaracterization of young black males. And in the long run, we've been inept, in my estimation, and unable to provide the quality and level of pragmatic and practical healthcare intervention that we're trained to provide to black males as a group. And we over-respond then with legalistic and militaristic, we're going to arrest you and put you in jail and all of those adverse concerns. We really are missing the point here. And a lot of it, for professionals, in my opinion, is our fault.
Yeah. And actually, Ms. Edsel Davis asked the question, what do we do or what do I do when I don't see hope and humor? Well, I think one of the things that hope and humor is specific for me is the way I approach it. But one of the things that I was trained with was what we just call care. I just care, right? It's the ability to sit down and Brother Bailey, sometimes that some people say uncomfortable silence. I've sat with some male clients specifically and just say, well, look, I'm going to just sit and wait for you to talk. Well, what you want me to say? I just want you to tell me what's going on. I just want you to tell me how you feel. And I actually, you know what, Ms. Davis, there you go. So recently I took on a young black male client comes to me. Mom says he doesn't talk to anybody about anything. He won't say anything. If you could get him to talk, I'm going to just be happy. 10 minutes in, he talked for the next 40 minutes, Brother Bailey. I couldn't say a word. He told me everything under the sun and in between. His mom texted me after and said, how did you get him to talk so much? What's going on? I can't believe that he talked to you so much. And I was like, well, I asked him a question that seemed like something he wanted to talk about. And she said, well, that's crazy because if I ask him the same question, he doesn't seem like he wants to talk to me.
Right.
So, well, maybe it was just something about me. And I told her later, I said, Mom, what happens is you begin to be too much like a parent and not enough like a mom. You're just serving your purpose. You want to know, why is he not doing his schoolwork? Why is he not doing his sister? Sometimes you got to sit and say, baby, I care about you. I love you. Now, I don't say, baby, I care about you. I say, look, I'm here to assist you and help you, whatever's going on. Let's make use of this time. Let's talk about what's going on. What makes you unhappy? So to the point, Miss Davis, I actually usually get to the point, and I'm saying Miss Davis, but is that an avatar? I can't tell. I'm going to just say, yeah, I can't tell. I can't tell. I'm realizing Edsel Davis. So I'm going to say Edsel Davis. I just show care. I think that's the point, Brother Bailey, we're really getting to, especially as mental health care practitioners, professionals. And then this is the other key point that I think we may need to add to. We are also training the next generation of mental health care practitioners. And that's one of the things I tell them all. And actually, I'll say this. You got me thinking about a lot of stuff right now, right? One of my supervisors told me this growing in my training. He said, you know what? Some of the best people make the best clinicians. And he said, because the best people just care about people.
Right.
Thank you, Brother Edsel Davis, for clarifying. I think your avatar was throwing me off because I don't think that's a real picture, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll make a couple comments. And Victor Narcisse, I think, is a doctor, a friend of ours, actually a deputy surgeon general who made some of the earlier comments. I want you to address this point next. Joyce Stagg just writes in, I wish you gentlemen had been around when I was having issues with my son, tried to find help from churches and Boys and Girls Club, but nobody wanted to help. And I want you to address that, Dr. Turner. But I'm going to go and share a story. I'll try to make it brief. I've not told this story before, but I guess this is the time and place. So I've got a case, and just for the record, I'm a psychiatrist, and we aren't as fortunate, I think, as psychologists. Sometimes we don't get as, and I'm in administration, so I don't get as many cases as I would like. So I'm very jealous of Dr. Tony. He probably has a much more vibrant practice and life than I have right now, but that's a story for another time. But I do try to take my cases on Mondays, and I try to take at least 2 new cases every Monday. So somebody got to me, and it's a long story, but a woman comes in. She's a grandmother raising a grandson. He's age 12, et cetera, et cetera. The same story you just shared. He won't talk and having trouble in school and getting sanctioned and suspended from school and all kind of stuff. And he came in, and you think about it when you made your point, because he just kind of sat there and wouldn't say anything. So I let her talk a good bit, XYZ like, and as you normally would do, I asked her to support the step out so I could talk to him individually. And he kind of still sat there, and he wouldn't say much, and we were kind of having this, great standoff, if you will. So I started asking him what did he like to do and what did he enjoy and what kind of made sense. And Brian Turner, I'll tell you, like this was yesterday, this was within the last year I was in New Orleans. He just got up and got on the floor and started doing push-ups. Not a word came out of his mouth. And he knocked me out 10 real good ones over, da-da-da. And then he got up and looked me in the face and said, I bet you can't do it. And man, all kind of emotions went through me. The goosebumps popped out over me. Not only do I do a lot of push-ups now myself for my own health, if you will, but I realized that was his way to communicate with me. He needed to say something that made him feel that we at the same level of power. So the power of my age and my position and me being adopted, white coat syndrome, probably is terrifying to a young male and 12 years old. And I'm at LSU. I'll say on a public record, many think that LSU has not been historically over the last 100 years as a congenial place for young black males in New Orleans to go for healthcare, if you will. So I'll tell the record, I did hop on the floor. They may not have been great. I may not want to be videoed, but I did do 10 push-ups, I promise you, in front of this young guy. Right. With my suit and tie on, with my coat off. And that guy comes and sees me twice a month now, and he talks. So your point is remarkably important. It's our responsibility to give them a space and a time to feel comfortable, to feel humane, to feel heard, to feel listened to. Again, young Black men are people too, my brother.
Yeah, yeah. Look, man, look, it got me thinking, bro. I love when we have the synergistic opportunities. This is the lesson Dr. White gave me about working with young Black men. He told his story about how he was working he went somewhere to do a consult, but somebody asked him, kind of like what Joyce Stagg is asking, to work with boys and girls. And I'm gonna make a point to Joyce about how we can be found. But he says he goes to the house, right? Because Dr. White was this just overly joyous person. Goes to the house and he says, the little boy says to him and looks at him and says, "Is you down with the hood?" And he says to me, he's like, "Brian, I didn't know what to do." He said, "Because I got this little boy that's no more than 10 or 11 challenging my street cred," right? He said, "I know what street cred is, and how dare this little boy ask me this?" And he said, but it reminded me I needed to connect with him on something that would make him feel as though I was okay. He was like, too often we want our young brothers and sisters to be okay for us. Right. They're not worried about if they're okay for us. They are living within their circumstances, situations, and they don't feel like there's anybody who can help them. So we have to get down and get with them. And to Joyce's point, I think one of the first things I would always encourage people to do, ask other people if they've ever sought out mental health care. Quiet is kept. Many people in our communities know people that know someone who can help. That's the first point. The second point, I think we have to be reminded that there are entities and individuals in our communities that if we tell people our need, they will ensure that we get connected. And I stand on this because I really appreciate the city, my clientele, my friends. I don't spend any money on advertising, marketing, and promotions, and I stay busy. I love that because what that means is people are willing to share what I do unadulterated, without a filter, and without fear. Don't be afraid to tell folks that you have a need or you're looking for mental health care, because people will tell you who they worked with. They will tell you their experiences. Just like we know in our communities, the barbershop, the beauty salon, the church, check with your sorority, your fraternity. Like, people know folks. And I think that's the other piece that we come to tonight, Brother Bailey, is that we're not hiding. We're out here and we're willing to help. But we also have to be mindful of the sensitive nature that go back to drapetomania, the diagnosis that was provided through APA that said that African-American slaves were mentally ill because they wanted to escape. I'm not always happy that former presidents of APA spoke and did research that was not positive and not accurate on African Americans. And so that's another reason, Brother Bill, is important that we have these conversations to undo the wrongs that our professions have perpetrated upon our communities. And I stand on that. I do not, and I will not be okay with the fact that these things have happened within my profession. So we constantly fight. I'm a member of ABSI. I'm on their the ethics board. I'm the co-chair for the ethics board, and we have these conversations all the time. How do we ensure that our communities understand that there are people that are helpers? And to your point, Brother Bailey, and this is that real piece, because I've had trainers and supervisors who were not Black that helped me understand the role that cultural competency has in competency. But we have to be willing to stand up and speak about this. And so I think tonight is a great opportunity to remind ourselves of that. We're not hiding, and all you have to do is ask. We are here, and we will help. And once again, as I alluded to, if I can't help, I'm going to help you get the help you need.
Right. Well, I'm supposed to give you a notice that you had 1 minute to kind of close, but I think that was a wonderful close. So we're going to end with that. I'm going to go to Brother Sterling, our National Surgeon General for Healthcare. I would just end my last comment by making an argument to our entire audience that I've been doing this 33 years, and I, like you point out, don't know an African-American mental health professional that's not full. We are absolutely across the country full. We are constantly asked for referrals. We are constantly asked, do you know a mental professional who's culturally competent, a Black male, et cetera, in San Francisco or Denver or Miami or South Carolina or Chicago or Greenville, Mississippi, if you will, and the like. So this idea that stigma is real, maybe it may occur in certain governmental settings and economic settings, and whether or not insurance will pay for our services. But the reality is people will work diligently to try to find you and try to find the quality care that they need for their family and for their children. Very much appreciative of your comments tonight. Remarkably timely. Really warms my heart, I think, to be here in New Orleans with clinicians like yourself who really aim to help our community. With that being
Thank
said,
you, brother.
we'll bring this didactic piece to a close, and I'll turn it over to our Surgeon General, Brother Jeffrey Sterling.
Yes, let's keep you two back on the screen. I want you to do a follow-up. You've really danced on this nail quite well, and I think that Carlita and Joyce and the other, actually all of the respondents have framed this question that I'd like you to answer directly. The Surgeon General Initiative is really about empowering individuals. You've provided a tremendous amount of information. It's been quite fantastic. Thank you for what you've done. Let's flip it. Let's actually end by giving the audience things that they can do to be empowered, because you guys are both in New Orleans. There's a big old country out there. And where they are, they will need to know how to interact with their mental health professionals and with their other healthcare professionals in a way that they can extract the type of sensitivity, cultural sensitivity, cultural competence that you guys have brought to the table. It can't just be happenstance that they find good clinicians. We have to get our community to the point to where we walk into these scenarios empowered. So give our audience a quick word of advice as to how they can engage their clinicians, their mental health professionals, in a way to elicit the type of cultural competency that we've been discussing this evening.
Right. So I think great point. And I think that's one of the things that I love to talk about, actually, is I love to talk about mental health consumerism, right? As a consumer of mental health, what should you be looking at? First and foremost, I want someone who is degreed, credentialed, licensed, and has all the requisite things to be practicing, right? Now, there are many different practices and practitioners. Brother Bailey and I, Brother Bailey is a psychiatrist. That means he went to medical school. I'm a psychologist. That means I went to professional school. You have licensed clinical social workers. You have LMACs, licensed mental health care practitioners. There's a lot of different designations. Be clear on where the person is practicing. They should provide you with a license number. They should provide you with a copy of their insurance information. They should be able to provide you with a bio that details what they do. That becomes vitally important because as you think about the person you're working with, you want to be able to ensure that you feel comfortable that they have the competency broadly defined to do the work. Secondly, I think we got to be honest about this. Ask people, how many Black people you work with? How many African Americans have you seen? How many African Americans are you currently seeing? Did you ever have any African American supervisors? Do you have any African American clients that you will refer me to ask them what their experiences are like? Or say, hey, can I sit in your office and see when African Americans are coming in here and ask them about your services? Another thing, and I think this is the action item. Invite mental health care practitioners to cultural events to come out and see what's going on. Ask them to come out and staff a table. Ask them to come to a church service and talk about what they do. Put them in a position where they are willing to put themselves out in a culturally diverse environment where they have to show their true self. That would be my top 3 things.
Fantastic. Anything to add, Brother Bailey?
This brother's been on fire tonight, boy. He's happy we found you, Turner, boy. I tell you, you are good. All I was going to add is that I said this on this session before. I have appreciated some value of being better understood in the Black community throughout I keep saying my 30-year career. And one example is the Black church. I think, in my experience, has embraced Black mental professionals more over time than earlier in my career. An example I often give is that there was always going to be a health fair, and we'd always go to health fairs. Been doing that since I was in medical school in Galveston in the late 80s, 86 to 90. And it'd be a table for blood pressure and a table for cholesterol and blah, 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 but nothing for mental health, especially in the Black community. And over time, that began to change. And as pastors began to accept, I think, and positively sanction or acknowledge that mental health mattered, then you could have a mental health professional at a table, whether you're doing a depression screen or you give somebody a chance to kind of talk to you informally and exchange phone numbers to get an appointment to be seen later. I think that these changes have been slow and gradual, but they do, I think, acknowledge over time, I think, a progressive acceptance that the brain is an organ of the body like others, heart, lung, and kidney, and things don't always go right. It's not just because you're older, senile dementia. You could be at a younger age or a middle age and your brain not work right, and you could have clinical depression. Huge issues for us to make sure we tap into those levels of professionals. And also, I guess I could say, we got to also push entities like at LSU, for example, to be willing to recruit and hire and promote more African Americans in top positions, so that you have more than one African American male in a residency or in a program, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that person won't necessarily be tokenized, if you will, and that their themes and ideas will be made more integrated into the overall activity. We often call it DEI, or diversity and equity and inclusion, making more of a fair process. New Orleans is 2/3 Black, and we said Louisiana is 1/3 Black. We've got to have a comparable number of academic professionals in mental health care. We're trying to move in that direction. We can do better.
Well, that's fantastic, gentlemen. I want to thank you for what it is you do, who you are, and for the fantastic presentation this evening. We're going to continue the conversation 2 weeks from tonight with more conversations about the brain. However, it'll be from a medical standpoint. We'll be talking about Alzheimer's and brain awareness. So how the brain works normally and how it works not quite abnormally, but with age considerations factored in. So once again, thank you for joining us, and we will see you in 2 weeks. I'm Brother Dr. Jeffrey Sterling on behalf of Board of Directors and General President, Brother Dr. Willis Lanza III. Thank you for joining us this evening, and good night and good health.